Awesome.
Us. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Leverage a Model to Close Checks by our incredible partners at Forecastr. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. We have, it's always lovely just to see who is here and where you're calling in from in the world. I'm Jenna Whitaker. I'm Operations and Events Manager at Graham & Walker, and I'm currently in Denver, but I'm moving to Seattle this May. So if there's any Seattleites, hello. If you're just joining us for the first time, Graham & Walker is a venture firm that activates the potential of women in business through programs, community, and direct investments. And we're on a mission to reshape the public markets by investing in technology companies led by women and non-binary founders. Part of that includes sessions like today, where we bring in amazing people like Stephen Plappert. Stephen is co-founder and CEO of Forecastr. He is a two-time Techstars alum and serial entrepreneur that loves helping other founders. He spent years providing outsourced financial leadership to growing companies, and when he isn't working on Forecastr, you can find him in the woods camping and rock climbing. Forecastr and Graham & Walker go way back. We are always proud to say that we were Forecastr's first paid partnership. They also are a startup, and so they're right there in the trenches with all of you fundraising. So in other words, they know what they're talking about. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Stephen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jenna. It's an honor to be here. Means a lot. And yeah, it's great to meet all you ladies and hopefully add some value today as a fellow founder, like Jenna said, kind of out there in the trenches. I'm actually raising our Series A right now. That's part of the reason, at least I'm all dolled up in a suit. So yep, in there doing this stuff right now. Before I get started though, I'd love to introduce Haley here. We have her as the founder and CEO of Mito Materials. She's an awesome founder that I've got to know for quite some time. Very inspirational. And yeah, we brought Haley in so that she could talk a little bit about her experience leveraging a model in a fundraising environment and what worked and didn't work for her and how she did it and that kind of stuff. So I'll be kind of pulling her in along the way. But Haley, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Mito, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, perfect. So Haley Keith, CEO of Mito Materials. We're based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we're actually a hard tech materials company. So we manufacture functionalized graphene and additives that go into composite materials to make them lighter, tougher, and stronger. So you can think of right now a lot of sporting goods applications that we're in, skis, golf clubs, and fishing rods. Our material goes into those products and makes it stronger, lighter, and more sensitive with the vibration. So we're here because we believe that materials, when you make better materials, are going to make the better world. So we are really excited. Our team is up to 11 now. I think when I met Stephen, we were 3 people working out of one house with one toddler and a guy in a lab in Oklahoma. But everybody's located now in Indianapolis. I've raised a seed and a seed 2 since knowing Stephen, and his forecasting models helped a lot. So I'm really happy to provide feedback and examples of how I was able to use a lot of Excel sheets that didn't seem to work to a much more seamless fundraising process in my seed 2, thanks to Forecastr and the way I was able to tell the story around product manufacturing, which is not as easy to model in Excel. So excited.
Right on, Haley. Thanks for that introduction. And so great to see you. And then I'll also introduce, so we got Calvin here. Calvin, give us a wave. So he'll be kind of monitoring the chat and whatnot. So if you got a question, please don't hold back. Feel free to throw it in the chat. Honestly, I don't know, Jenna, I think people can come off mute, right? So if they can, I mean, feel free to just do that as well, really, and just kind of throw it out there. So, you know, I'm happy to make it as conversational as like, so whatever you'd like to do, you know, but definitely don't hold back. We're here to answer your questions. We're here to try to add as much value as possible. And with that in mind, we got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. So this is the second part of a 3-part series that we're doing with Graham & Walker. And in the first part, which we did about a month ago, we talked about the power of a great financial model. So if you were here, that's awesome. If you weren't, you really missed out. No, I'm just kidding. But we did. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about kind of why you should build a financial model for your company, a little bit about how you should build a financial model for your company. But we really tried to make the case for like, hey, like, what can a financial model do for us? It can help us, set and manage growth targets. It can help us make sure we don't run out of cash. It can help us tell a story with investors. And that's what we're really going to dig into today, is that fundraising use case. Like, we all want to raise money for our companies. We want to achieve high growth. How can we use a financial model to increase the chances that an investor is going to invest in us, that investor is going to write us a check, that we're going to be able to close that investor? So that's what we're going to really dig in and talk about today. And Haley and I will both, share some of our experiences as founders raising capital, just in terms of financial questions that get asked or how we used our models to raise that kind of stuff. But like I said, here for y'all. So please do be liberal with all your questions. Just real quick on me, and Jenna already gave me a great introduction. So I am Stephen Plappert. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forecastr, which is an online financial model for your startup. So we're on a mission to make it just easier and less time consuming to kind of build and manage a financial model for your company. I've raised, I need to update the slide, a little bit over 8 million in venture capital in my career. So more than some, less than many others. I've built a lot of financial models though. I've helped a lot of companies as a head of finance, started a couple companies myself, and so Forecastr, it's an alternative to Excel when it comes to building and managing a financial model. It's online, it's integrated with your accounting. It's just a lot more visual and kind of like, I like to think of it as like on rails, where it's a little bit harder to kind of break it, and have all those errors and stuff like that. So if you're in the market for a financial model, if you need a great financial model and you don't have one, of course, we'd love to work with you. So Calvin can drop a link in the chat for how to explore to see just kind of if Forecastr is a good fit for you, and we'd be honored to work with you should the need be there. But that is not the purpose of today's talk. I always be sure to say that. Not here to sell you on my product. Not here to try to get you to become a customer of Forecastr. We're here to try to educate and try to provide some value. So we're going to quickly just do a recap of the power of a great financial model. That's like kind of the very quick piece of what we talked about last time. And then we're going to get into kind of the heart of it. We're going to talk about how you use your model in your pitch deck. We're going to talk about how you present your model to investors. Like, how should you actually go about walking an investor through your financial model? Then we're going to pull up an example. I'll show you, kind of at least how I'm doing it right now. I'm out raising a Series A for Forecastr right now, so I'm doing this all the time. And along the way, Haley, I'd love to kind of pull you in and ask you some questions and stuff like that. And also, please feel free to chime in anytime you want. Of course, you're our special guest. So that's it. That's what we got on the docket for today. So what is a financial model? This is something we talked a little bit about last time. A financial model, you could use a lot of different words to describe a financial model, but I think a very descriptive way to think about it is a business simulator. It should essentially be simulating your business into the future, which should allow you to kind of take your business on a virtual test track. You should be able to see, how does my business perform in a variety of environments? Like, what do I need to do to reach 1 million in annual revenue? Or how many people do I need to hire and win? Or, how much money do I need to raise in order to get, the next 2 years worth of runway? Like, it should be kind of simulating your business into the future so that you can make better decisions in the present that affect the future, right? Everything we do today affects the future. So we need to be able to kind of look forward in that way. Now, there's a couple different reasons why we would do this. One of the main reasons is setting and managing to growth targets. If you're looking to get high growth, you got to really figure out, well, formulaically, kind of, mechanically, how's that going to happen? And how can you hold yourself accountable to that? Model's going to help you do that. It's also the case for a lot of companies, mine included, where maybe you're not turning a profit yet. So you're kind of a ticking time bomb. You need to make sure that, like, either turn a profit or attract new investment before you run off the cliff. A model's going to really help you do that as well. But we're actually not going to focus on those things today as much. We're going to focus on kind of the third use case, which is like putting the investor in the car next to you and like taking the investor on the same virtual test track, right? Like you're trying to give the investor kind of a window into the power of your business, right? And you want to tell a story, a convincing story of how your business becomes this really awesome, successful, huge company, you know? And so a financial model can be a great way to tell what we call the numerical narrative. You know, it tells the story of the numbers, you know, of how you get from kind of, you know, where you are today to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So that's what we're really gonna focus in on during today's talk. So the first place this is going to show up is in your pitch deck. You know, so everybody I find is usually pretty familiar with having a pitch deck, right? You're going to come up with kind of a visual deck that's going to support your story. You're going to walk through that with investors and use that to kind of make sure you hit all the important points. This is the first place that a model should show up kind of in your fundraising process. You know, I think a model should just kind of be in there to do one thing, and that's just to kind of tease investors, you know, with your financial projections. Basically, you want to kind of, you know, convince investors that, hey, you've got some financial rigor behind this thing. You've thought about, you know, the financial underpinnings of the business, of how the business is going to scale. And so you're just trying to signal that. So I think a model for most businesses, it should not be kind of your main focal point in the deck. I don't think it should be your first or second slide, right? I think it should be kind of later in the deck, kind of nearing the end, more of like a kind of a stepping stone to that next meeting. You know, I think of fundraising as kind of a chain link of interaction points where you're trying to build trust and build confidence as you raise the round. And that initial pitch is you're just kind of setting the hook, right? You're just setting the hook, you're building that interest, you're getting that trust up. I think as you go through the main points of that story, which would largely be, you know, kind of your problem, solution, your vision, your traction, your team, your go-to-market strategy, your competitive landscape, you know, like all those things I think are more kind of crucial and fundamental. And all you're trying to do here, just kind of putting this near the end, is like tease out this idea that, hey, like you've actually got a lot of meat behind this company. Like you've really put some serious thought, you know, into this company. And so you want an investor kind of asking this question, which is like, where did you get those numbers? You know, like they're seeing those numbers on the slide, and that's all fine and dandy, but they're often gonna ask themselves, well, where did you get these numbers? Like, where are these coming from? And that kind of plays, you know, right into your hand in terms of, you know, you being able to say, hey, well, actually, I've got a great financial model that I've built for the company, you know, and I think it really kind of showcases how much thought we've put into the company and how well we understand our business. I'd love to spend 45 minutes with you walking you through our financial model, you know, and how we and just like go through the business, right? You know what I mean? And that's like a next kind of link in the chain. You know, it's another way that you can build trust, you know, with that investor, you know, as you go. So yeah, I think that's one way at least you can use your model in your pitch deck. Now, Haley, when you had your pitch deck, did you typically include a financial forecast slide, or how did you do it?
Before I had Forecastr, no, because it always got me into trouble. Because I would always get asked a lot of questions, and it's very, from my experience, it takes a lot of practice to keep things high level, right? Because when you go in and build a model, you will know everything about your business because you've built every part of it. And I poured over Excel spreadsheets for hours. So whenever they would ask me a question, I tended to get really detailed. That was not helpful. When we raised our seed 2, we did throw in some forecasted numbers, and I was able to then walk it through and show my line of thinking, which is what I learned investors are really more interested in. Investors are, and at different levels, right? So if you're really like early pre-seed, seed 1, seed 2, they're interested in how you think about your spending and how you think about your growth and what are those triggers that are going to take you there, versus like when you're at a Series A level, like Stephen, and you can that's all about numbers and going back to the data points that you have and how you can scale that data points and be that recurring. And that's where models become really helpful because it can really forecast into everything that you're doing. So I've done it both ways, and I've definitely learned a lot more about falling into the trap of being too detailed and keeping then more things high level, to the point where like my last raise, I just said, you know, financial models are as good as they are, and they are always changing. And what you're really here to ask me is how I think about my company and how I think about spending your money. And here's how I do that. And here's how I walk you through my logic. So.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. And I think Haley's so right when she talks about like what investors actually want out of that financial model. It's like they know probably better than anybody how wrong a lot of models are. You know what I mean? They're doing all day is seeing a bunch of early stage companies and seeing a bunch of models and like then getting the chance to see it play out over a couple of years, and they're almost always wrong. So they know that, you know, probably better than anybody. And I think just like Haley said, it's like they're really trying to get a sense of what's your thought process. Have you critically thought through each aspect of your business, and how are you thinking through, you know, your business? How are you planning to scale the business? Are you going to be more capital efficient? Are you looking to really, you know, put the pedal to the metal on growth, or how are you thinking about that? You know, it's like, it really is a lot more of like about strategy and thought process than it is about like the underlying numbers, you know, and the output. I think it's a really great point. And it's kind of oh yeah, please. Yeah.
I was gonna say, actually, I'll add to that too, because now that I kind of see that all of you are women, it's a lot different for women raising. You get asked a lot more risk questions when financing and going into the model. And I've experienced that firsthand. I had investors when I was in diligence. I went through like a 7-month diligence process. And they asked me to zero out every part of my forecast to prove that the numbers were adding up, that things were working, and that I could mitigate through risks if a grant that I was already received would not come through for some unknown reason. So be mindful, as I think a female raising capital, that there is a level of different types of questions. And I've seen this, I don't know, Stephen, what your experience is on this, but like men typically got asked like through research, oh, how are you going to grow sales? And how, you know, tell me how you're going to do this, tell me how you're going to do that. When it's women, it's, tell me why your sales are so low. Why are you expecting less? It's very much more risk forward questioning. And so I've had to learn how to flip that backwards a lot too.
Yeah.
To go back towards the thought process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. That obviously I defer to Haley more because I can't speak to that from personal experience. But I think that's a great point, and it's a good kind of segue into really what a lot of what we're kind of talking about here, which is that like the ultimate like kind of closer, conversion driver when it comes to using the model in a fundraising process is walking the investor through the model, presenting the model. And it's very important to do it in the way Haley's talking about, where it's a lot more high level strategic, a lot less getting into all the weeds and like and spilling the guts of the model. And we're going to walk through kind of how we do that. But that's really where kind of the magic happens. That's where the investor kind of gets a preview into what life would be like with you as an investment, you know, and that's where you guys can have, you got to set the stage for like a really strategic discussion about the business in a way that I think communicates a lot of confidence, and it builds a lot of trust. Again, like Haley said, when it's done well, and it does take practice, you know, just like practicing your pitch, you know, just like practicing telling that story, and which you should practice a bunch. I had to practice it a ton. You know, and I'm still practicing it, and I'm still making iterations to it as I raise this round. You know, your model needs that same kind of treatment when you're walking through it. You got to practice, get some current investors, you know, get some founders that you know, practice walking them through it, that kind of thing. But here are some tips for presenting your model to investors, and then we'll quickly jump in, and I'll kind of show you, you know, a high level of how I do it. Then I'd love to get Haley's take on that as well, and I think we'll have plenty of time for questions too. So first things first, though, I would say it's very important that you don't let the model stand alone. You know, so if you have an Excel or Google sheet, you know, you can email it over to someone. If you're in Forecastr, you can create a view only link. You can send that link to folks. But you don't want to do that before the meeting, and there's a really strategic reason for that. And that's that most people, when they are when they're consuming new information, they have a tendency to form an opinion about it, right? And then once their opinion is formed, people tend to be kind of stuck in their ways. You know, they're difficult Those opinions are difficult to change once they're formed. And so you really want to be in the room when that opinion is being formed so that you can kind of bend it to your favor while it's malleable. You know what I mean? If it kind of solidifies when you're not in the room and then you come up in after it, it's very hard for you to change that opinion. And so this is for this reason. I'm typically against sharing decks. I will do it if I just have to. If an investor just won't meet with me, I'll share a short version of it. But I won't share my model. I'll only meet with an investor to kind of walk through the model. And that's because I want to control the narrative. I want to say my piece on top of the model so that I make sure it's received in the right light. And I find that investors, when they're left to their own devices, they'll typically kind of form negative opinions about stuff. And there's a reason for that. And that's that, they might see 100 companies this month, but they can only pick one of them to invest in. And that doesn't mean the other 99 aren't great businesses. They could have a lot of great businesses, but they just only have enough cash to invest in one, so they've got to be selective. And so they're constantly looking for reasons to be out, and if you're not in the room, they'll find those reasons a lot easier than if you're in the room, and you can like kind of navigate that, right? You can alleviate those concerns. So force the meeting, make sure that you like what you want with investors is meetings. So meet with them to walk through your deck, meet with them to walk through your model, meet with them, bring in a co-founder and engage in that interaction, that kind of thing. When you're in the meeting, Haley said it right. You got to stay high level, strategic. This is what will make a lot more sense, I think, when I get in there and I start walking through my model. But you really don't want to go deep in the weeds. You don't want to unearth all this information about how the model works initially. You want to be prepared to do that if you're asked to do that. But you really want to stay high level. You want to stay strategic. You want to try to, kind of get through it unscathed, so to speak, and just communicate the fact that your business inside and out. And so in part, you're really trying to be in control. The more you take control of the meeting, the more you're going to be able to get through it like that. The more the investor kind of takes control of the meeting, so to speak, the more they might be able to kind of push you into directions that aren't as useful for you as the founder in kind of achieving your purposes. So I think it's important to, in the meeting, really keep in mind that your leadership's always on display. So showing up to the meeting on time, having an agenda, walking through that with an investor, try to make sure the conversation's anchored in such a way that achieves, your goals, and then walking through it kind of methodically, but high level strategic. And really make it a conversation. It shouldn't be you over here defending the model against the investor. It should be kind of you and the investor taking a look at the model, saying, like Haley said, look, models are models. Like, they're not a crystal ball. They don't predict the future. It's just a model. Like, I think it's a great understanding and description of the business, and it's really useful for strategic conversation. But at the end of the day, it's just a model. So we're going to look at it together. We're going to talk about it together. You may even make an adjustment to it. If you're having a good conversation about, conversion rate, and they think it should be this or that, maybe you even like play around with it like a sandbox, but you're just trying to give that investor kind of a window into, what life would be like with you as an investment. And then always follow up. A fundraise is about running a very diligent process. I think the more you can move people from stage 1 to stage 2, right, in a straightforward way, the better chances you are of driving momentum and scarcity and things like that. So I think it's always really good to make sure you have a clear next step identified at the end of the meeting, whatever that may be, them getting back to you in a certain period of time or schedule another meeting, whatever. Always follow up, always like reiterate that next step in the email. Just kind of some good hygiene stuff there. But let's jump into the model and take a quick look at this. So I'll pull up, and hopefully I'm sharing my whole screen here. I'll pull up my deck, and I'll just kind of quickly go through, and you can see that, I've got traction stuff, I've got why we win, I've got team, and then I have the forecast kind of nearing the end. It's the second to last slide right before my ask. And it's just a high level, summarized income statement that's just meant to convey, hey, I've got a model. For me, it also conveys the fact that it's in my product, but it's just, hey, I've got a model. And here's kind of a high level financial. So that's all we're trying to do there. And then when you get the meeting set, and you're walking through it. So I like to go into there's kind of 3 phases of it. the first phase in the meeting, and all of this, you should be doing this kind of high level strategic thing. First phase is about revenue. What I've found in my career, at least, is that investors largely care about revenue. That's kind of the metric that they care about the most. Growth is what they want to focus on. So typically, a lot of their questions are about how do you acquire customers? How do you monetize those customers? Where are you? What are your milestones? What are the key metrics, et cetera? Like things about the revenue forecast. So that's where I typically will start first, because I view my job when I'm presenting the model is to like alleviate concerns, answer questions. So I'm there to kind of answer those questions, alleviate concerns about revenue. And then once I go through revenue, I'll typically jump to kind of use of funds. So I'll jump to like the people and expense section of the model. And so I'll talk about, okay, if I'm going to achieve all that great revenue, I need people. I need to fill skill gaps. I need to hire these people. Or here are the sales and marketing expenses I have. So I might jump into expenses and talk about that. My business is very kind of balance sheet light. Haley you may go into your balance sheet and talk about some expenses there. But you're kind of going, okay, like Haley said earlier, like, how are you going to spend my money? Okay, well, if we're going to achieve this great growth, here is kind of the use of funds. Here's how we're going to spend the money. And then at the end of that, I like to jump over to, financials and kind of zoom out and go big picture. Okay, if we're going to hit those revenue milestones, if we raise this money and have that use of funds, here's where here's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and wrap that back to the investment. That's why we're raising $8 million in the form of a Series A to achieve these projections. We'd love to work with you. We think you'd be a great partner. Do you have any other questions for me? Or like, what do you think is a good next step? When do you think you guys could make an investment decision? That kind of thing. Like really kind of putting a point on it at the end. But I think that kind of 3-stage flow of going through revenue, going through customer acquisition, going through revenue, going through the kind of the expenses, the use of funds, and then go kind of high level investment can be a really good way to just kind of, set an agenda for the call, do it in a constructive manner where you're starting with what the investor cares about, you're ending with what you care about, the investment, and then making a decision, that kind of stuff. So that I think sets you up well for that next step, and also for that good kind of strategic conversation. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through customer acquisition and give you an example of like what I kind of view as this kind of like ideal, walkthrough when you're going high level strategic. And then Haley, I'd love for you to, comment on kind of like, what, how you did it, how you kind of walk through your model or what you choose to talk about. So what I'll usually do when I start is just kind of, start with just doing, I think much like Haley did, just kind of like a little bit of a preamble where I'll just say, hey, so look, so this is our financial model. We've put a lot of time, energy, and effort into this model. We use this model, month to month to run our business, to set our growth targets, to plan cash. It's an active model. But at the end of the day, we recognize it is a financial model. It's always changing, that kind of stuff. It's not a crystal ball, but I think it's a really good representation of our business and how it works. And I'd love to walk through that with you to talk through it. So the first thing I'd like to focus on is customer acquisition. That's a really important piece of our business. Go to market. How do we acquire customers? If we can't acquire customers, we can't, generate any revenue. And that's critical for us in terms of winning in this market. So here are how we acquire customers. You can see we use a kind of a variety of different channels to acquire customers. The numbers here in 2022, these are all our actual numbers. So you can see what our biggest channels are. Other strategic networks, we do a lot of webinars. Techstars drives a lot of business. So these are some of our bigger channels. But then you can see kind of how we see that going as we scale the company up out into 2027. We still think networks are going to be our big drivers, but we envision a lot going down from kind of Google and SEO, and paid advertising being a material channel for us as well. There's 3 main ways that we really go about acquiring customers. Strategic networks, so we do kind of an expertise for exposure exchange with channel partners and venture communities. These drive a lot of customers our way and really help us kind of get the word out about Forecastr. So strategic networks are big for us. Domain authority is something that we want to build. That's why we do a lot of webinars. That's why we think SEO is going to be big. Like, we want to be a thought leader in this space. We want to educate the market on how to build a great financial model. And then at the end of the day, we envision getting a lot of referrals, a lot of customer referrals. Founders chat with each other, and when they find a good solution, they'll tell another. And investors have a tendency to invite founders who invite other investors, and it kind of goes on down the line. So, these are the ways that we acquire customers, and if we kind of zoom into the present here, we're acquiring about 60 customers today, and a year from now, we'd like to double that. We'd like to get to about 120. So, that's kind of the lay of the land for us on the customer acquisition side. Any questions about how we acquire customers, or before we jump over to revenue, and we'll talk a little bit about how we monetize these customers, and how we see that changing over time. So just kind of, press pause there for me. That's what I like to do, is kind of this, like, opening up of talking about the model, kind of taking the pressure off, saying, hey, this is a model. It's not, doesn't mean it's always going to be right. But I do like informing the investor that this is something you use month to month to manage the business. Like telling the investor that these are this is actual data. That's really, it's a really good win if you're using it in that way, because it convinces the investor that, hey, there's real rigor here. So that can be a nice thing to add. But then, rather than kind of digging into any of the math about how these channels are actually working, the formulas, the inner workings of the model, anything like that, all I want to do is start with customer acquisition, is just go through high level, what are kind of the three biggest channels, the three biggest bets, so to speak, that we're placing on the customer acquisition side, and a little bit about why, like a little bit about strategic networks, a little bit about domain authority, a little bit about referrals, not a lot, just a little bit, so just kind of saying, hey, here are some strategic bets that we're placing. And then I kind of zoomed into, here's how we're doing right now, and here's where we want to be, maybe like 12 months from now. I just kind of picked a milestone. But so it's really like strategy and milestones that I'm trying to start with. And then if the investor is convinced, if they're like, you know what, I've actually got no real issue with your customer acquisition, I think you guys are doing a great job, let's talk more about how you monetize, because that's where my questions are, then great. You just kind of got through that section unscathed. Like, you didn't have to answer a bunch of questions. You didn't open up a bunch of can of worms, right? Like, you're moving on, and that's good. Or maybe they ask you a bunch of questions. Maybe they dig into certain aspects of the model, and they want to really go deep into understanding. Like, for us, we typically get the question, like, how do these partnerships work? Are they exclusive? What do you actually provide? Do you pay for them? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, they'll ask all that kind of stuff, and so that's good. You want to give them that space to ask those questions, answer those questions, engage, and that's how you're getting closer and closer to an investment. So yeah, that's how I do it. Haley, anything you'd want to add to that? Or you want to tell us a little bit about how you like to kind of walk through the model? Or
Yeah, so not knowing if any of you guys are in like hard product manufacturing, or we have a very different customer acquisition type of funnel, right? So I'm always really jealous when I see Stevens, because I'm like, oh man, it would be amazing to just know where all my leads come from and see how they funnel. But for us, the biggest challenge in our forecasting, and I always get hung up in customer acquisition, like no matter what, I'm getting a question here, because when we work with a customer, we're working with either a manufacturer who builds a product or a material supplier who makes a material, and we're trying to put our material inside it. There is a very long qualification and testing process when you are working with materials and science. And there are a lot of really technical people that you have to make the sale to. And then maybe you get lucky and you're some business people that's a lot easier to talk to. So our customer acquisition, we get, different channels, trade shows, word of mouth, investor intros, are some of our main channels. But then, and we do some marketing and advertising now in trade publications. But every single time we get a lead, it's probably like a 6-month time frame between that lead, like first customer introduction, to then flowing into any sort of revenue or monetization. And there's all these little things that have to happen: an NDA, an evaluation, a trial, send a sample. So when we walk through our customer acquisition, I got a lot of questions on that process, how we work through that process, and what our conversion rates are. It has been amazing to be able to look through and go back to HubSpot or our CRM and be able to pull those conversion rates of like, okay, if we get an intro from a trade show, like 10 out of 10, they're getting to an NDA, and then they're likely going to sign an evaluation contract, and we move them down the line. But that's just some of the differences, I think, in having more data-driven opportunities for customer acquisition and SEO to a really long product cycle where there's a lot of testing involved to even get to any start of monetization. And then that kind of goes into revenue streams, which is the next thing. But I always get a lot of questions on our customer acquisition from a hard tech side.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. It's like you said, it's like there's so many stages in that customer funnel. And so people are trying to understand, okay, what's that process? How do we turn a lead,
Yeah, do you remember like our first, Stephen, I don't remember if you remember my first model with you, but it was it was insane. And it got so ridiculous because customers or investors would ask us all these questions like, well, if you work with like smaller companies, it goes faster, right? So we had like lines we had like big whale customers, and we'd have examples of like Henkel and Dow, and then we'd have like small manufacturing and thermoplastics and then thermosets. It was very complicated to segment everything out. And that's how we were looking at our customer acquisition. Now we look at it a little bit differently, and we just say, look, there's a process, it takes 6 months, and here's our conversion rate on this process. But yeah, it can get really segmented the way that you choose to detail it out. So it took me a long time and a lot of time with Steven's team and people on my own team to get my head away from all the detail. Yeah, because there's a lot that you can parse out.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's interesting to hear Haley's, like experience too, because like totally different questions, like whereas I don't get any questions really about kind of the steps in my funnel and how I turn a lead into a customer. I get most of the questions of how do I get the leads? Because turning the lead to the customer is relatively straightforward, but I get all my questions about channels and how do I get the leads and where do they come from, yada, yada. Haley, it sounds like you get most of your questions about, okay, cool, you get a lead, but how do they become a customer? How long does that take? What percentage of them make it through the process? And that just goes to show you that like every business model, risks are in different places. For me, turning the lead into a customer is very low risk, but getting the leads is higher risk. And so they're asking about what they're concerned about. Investors are going to ask about areas that they view as risky and areas that they view as a concerning piece, perhaps. And so that's why they ask those questions. And that's why it's so critical that we don't talk at them too much and kind of fill the air with things that they might not be concerned about. We want to give them that opportunity to ask those questions so that we can address them and so that we can alleviate them and kind of show the investor, oh, you're asking about, how I turn a lead into a customer. Well, here's how long it takes, and here are my conversion rates and all that kind of stuff. And then giving them that answer, they're getting confident that you as a founder understand that process and you've got it under control, and that's what they ultimately want. They want to know that, you've got things under control. So that, maybe on customer acquisition, and then I won't necessarily go through revenue fully because you'll get the same kind of flavor, but just to talk about revenue, maybe Haley, I'll ask you kind of what questions you'll get here too. Similar deal, on revenue, I'll go through kind of a structure of it, like I'll tell investors that we sell annual subscriptions that are paid up front. We also have support subscriptions that are paid monthly, where we do some like tech-enabled services on top of the Forecastr platform. I'll talk to them a little bit about pricing, and then I'll talk to them about kind of where we are and our milestones, similarly. And the questions I'll typically get as a SaaS company are like, what does your churn look like? What's your pricing look like? What about your unit economics? I'll typically get, some questions around that. Haley, what about you as a hard tech company?
Yeah, unit economics, cost of goods, and the phases of selling, like how one of the things that we can do now is like add a product mix, but because you're doing like an evaluation and then like an evaluation contract's like 20 grams, maybe a pilot is 500 grams, but our goal is to get to these really large metric ton numbers. And so how does that scale, and how do you show that scale in the revenue stream, and time block that out so that you can show the volume increasing, and why did you come to those numbers? How did you, how many of your customers are actually going across that type of trajectory? And so we ended up splitting out a lot of our existing contracts as separate items because they span a lot of different industries. We're in sports and rec, we're also in auto, we're in materials. So we have specific contracts that are kind of keyed out, but then we have a modeled funnel that shows that level of growth. And we just say that that's based off of our existing, and we monitor that as we go.
Yep. Cool. Okay, and then maybe we'll talk about people, and then I want to open it up for some questions and stuff.
Yeah.
So on the people side, just the other big one I think, is for pretty much most businesses, people are your largest expense. And so I think really kind of zooming in on people and talking about that is really useful for investors in terms of how you're going to spend the money. And so what I like to typically talk about on the people side are, I like to identify known skill gaps, so if you have gaps in your team from a skill kind of competency perspective, I like to call that out for the investor and say, hey, like, we've got gaps, here they are, and we're going to be filling them. Because I think that shows a lot of maturity, and it shows, that you're self-aware. So I think that's important. And then beyond like kind of skill gaps that we want to hire for, I would say kind of like key kind of I don't know how to say this, but like kind of objective resources. Like I'll talk about like, hey, like we want to grow top line. If I'm going to do that, here are the people we need to hire to grow top line. So it's like purpose-driven hiring, or like we need to deepen the value of the product. So I'm hiring engineers and designers, like, and so I think like not just saying who you're going to hire, but like, why are you hiring these people? What are you trying to achieve? And how is your hiring plan kind of related to that? So that's how I'll like to talk about the people side of the house.
Yeah, I'll just add, like when you're building a model, the biggest self-check I always do is like, can that amount of people handle that amount of revenue? Like, is that realistic for the amount of production or the amount of like things that we're trying to accomplish? And if my number is 10 and I'm making 10 million, the answer is probably no. So modeled hires in the way that Stephen's talking about are really important, but I would use people always as a self-check. And sometimes, you overestimate, yeah, we're going to need this many people, but important to know which people trigger what levers at the top line, bottom, and how that's going to be helpful to the growth.
Yeah, totally. And that's one of the things that can even be good, in your model. Like for us, like we've got account executives here that are modeled. So like as our customer acquisition scales, the model is automatically hiring account executives because it knows that we need it to support the revenue forecast. So that's something that you could do in your model, and we could certainly help you do, which would just kind of make sure your model, stays in line with reality, like I was talking about. So let's jump back into the deck here, and we'll kind of close out and open it up for some questions. So you have plenty of time for some good questions from folks. So just to kind of hit on it here, so we do offer 25% off Forecastr for anybody in the Graham and Walker community. We're really happy to do that. We've worked with dozens of Graham and Walker founders, and they're all amazing. So if you find yourself in the need of a great financial model, we would absolutely love to work with you. We're honored to work with Haley and her business, and yeah, we'd love to work with you as well. So please do, take Calvin up on it. He'll throw a link there in the chat. We'd love to do it. You get a 30-day white glove onboarding with the financial modeling experts. They'll actually sit with you, every day, collaboratively build the model, make sure it shows well to investors, that kind of thing. It's typically $2,000 a year, and you can get it for $1,500. So yeah, love to do that if you're interested in doing that. But let's get to some questions. So plenty of time here for questions. Calvin, I don't know, do we have any questions in the chat so far?
From what I gather, I don't think that we have any queued up. And Jenna, you may know differently, but from what I gather, no.
Okay.
No, and we'll open it up for others if they want to just come off mute. But really quick before we do that, I'm just going to go ahead and throw a form in the chat here for feedback on the session itself. So please take a moment to fill that out, and also the link to sign up for the next session, just in case. Hopefully people stick around for the questions, but I want to get that in front of you too. And then a few exciting things coming up for us at Graham and Walker, just with events in Seattle next week, San Francisco coming up, and New York later this summer. So with that being said, I will now open it up for, does anyone have any questions for Stephen or Haley? And you can just come off mute and
Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Please.
What's the biggest objection that keeps coming in every pitch that you give?
I'll tell you mine. I'm pitching a lot right now. I pitched, probably 50 firms over the last 7 weeks. For me, the biggest objection is it's a really competitive space, and like how are you going to be different enough to win? What really makes kind of Forecastr really stand out, really be different? I found that's like the biggest hurdle that I've personally had to jump in this round is, hey, there's a lot of different companies kind of going after being the online financial model. How are you gonna be different? How are you gonna win? What do I say? So I typically talk about two pieces. And this is how I think a lot of markets end up shaking out. It kind of comes down to product and distribution. Like, how are you going about getting customers? Are you winning that game? And what's your product? And like, is that unique? And some businesses, it's all about the product. Some businesses, they got a really special product, they got IP, that kind of thing. Haley, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that could be a big piece of your business. For us, it's a lot more about distribution. Like the product, it's a software product that doesn't have a lot of IP. People can kind of copy the features. For us, it's all about distribution. So I talk a lot about, from a distribution perspective, how we're partnering with amazing communities, honestly, like Graham and Walker, and that's a big, value driver for us. I talk a lot about kind of how we're bringing the company to market, but I also talk about our human approach. I talk about how, where some of our competitors just do software only, we offer this human approach. We do this 30-day white glove onboarding. We give you a Phoebe, we give you a Nate, we give you, an Alex to be there and work with you, and people get a ton of value out of that. They love that. So that's what we talk about. But Haley, I'd be curious from your what is your typical biggest objection or biggest kind of concern in fundraising? How do you handle it?
For me, it always comes down to sales and the time of getting sales, right? So, okay, we're going to give you this money, but it's going to take you so long, XYZ day, to acquire these customers, you think. And that's if your product works after all the testing. So what does your customer journey look like? And we spend a lot of time in order to supplement that journey and sales piece with differentiating ourselves in the market alongside with our product, but with a lot of outward education and being kind of the thought leaders in graphing and functionalization in our space. So yeah, I would say it comes down to, talking a lot about the differentiators that your company has and what your team has to offer. But then for us, it's really comes down to sales. How are you going to get them? How are you going to speed up that process? How can you make it repeatable? Can you get these same material properties and the same things? Like right now we're in skis. We have really great traction in one ski company. It's like, why aren't you in 5 ski companies? It's kind of like, well, if I didn't want to be in 5 ski companies. So that kind of what if I wanted to be the premier ski, material in this one company, and then move on to golf, and also moved on to fishing. So strategy, it comes down to a lot of strategy. And we've been having a lot of conversations at the board level about that, building a brand, and then building a brand and a product, and how you distribute that product. So yeah.
Great question. Who else? Anybody else have a question they want to ask? Well, you got me.
I have a question.
Yeah, please, Pamela.
I'm sorry I can't come off, turn on the video. I'm actually in transit to my next appointment, but I wanted to ask, I'm presuming that the Forecastr tool can help with this, but how do you choose the dollar amount to raise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you are right in that that's absolutely one of the use cases of Forecastr. I think it's something that Forecastr could really help you do. But more broadly, that is really one of the use cases of a financial model. Even if it's in Excel or Google Sheets, it'll really help you do this. And that's try to figure out how much money you need. And so I'll say for me, so when I was trying to figure out, okay, like how much money do I want to raise in a Series A? The first thing I did was I went to my financial model, and I used my financial model to shape a forecast that I thought was attractive but reasonable. I wanted to kind of say, okay, 2 years from now, where do I want to go? how many customers do I want to sell, and how much revenue do I want to grow to? I want to, 2 to 3x year over year. So I want to get to about right here. So I made my model tell that story. And then like Haley said, you got to kind of go through the thought process of saying, well, how many people do I need to do that? And is that all right sized? So you have to go through this thought experiment of saying, okay, well, if you want to get there from revenue, here's the people you need to hire, and you should engage your team with that if you can. Talk to your team about how you think you guys need to scale, that kind of stuff. So work through that. And so once you do that, once you put all the people you think you're going to hire in there, you shape the revenue curve, et cetera, the model should kind of spit out, here's how much money you need. The model said that if we wanted to get 2 years worth of runway and get all those things, then we would need $5.5 million. That's what the model said we need, almost $6 million. And so, but I'm saying I'm raising 8. Well, why is that? Well, because anytime you look at a model, you should always take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? It's like, it's not always the truth. And so if it says you need 6, I always think it's good to try to, add at least 10% to that, if not maybe 20, 25%. So you add some buffer in there so that you don't have to execute just perfectly. So you've got some wiggle room. And then the other aspect of it, you have to ask yourself is like, do you think that's feasible, right? Because the model could say I needed 15 million, and I could say, well, I don't care what the model says, there's no way I'm raising 15 million right now. I got to rework this model. So like, hedge yourself with that as well. But that's how I came at it. Haley, what about you?
Same, very similar. I mean, looking at what you need to get to the next couple milestones. Our last raise came together really quickly because we had a lot of our investors were going pro rata. So what I ended up doing is doing the model thing, and then I was talking with our investors about their pro rata, and I thought I could get about 2 million in pro rata, and then if I could get another 2 million on top of that, then I would have a really hefty safety net, and I ended up raising 4.6. And only bringing in 2 new investors. So we had 1 lead, and then everyone else just went pro rata plus, which fell together really well. So I take it from kind of what do I need approach, and then where am I at with our partners? What am I able to kind of get in the market? But that was a little bit more unique situation. Like we weren't going out for an A, we needed to do a lot more proving, and we had a lot of weird asks. Like we wanted to move the entire company, and who wants to fund that? So yeah, but similar structure.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the answer. And I'm sorry to be ignorant on this, but can you define pro rata and how you structured that?
Yeah. So what some of your investors have pro rata right. So whenever they invest, they have the right to invest up to the amount so they're not diluted in the next round. And I used Carta for ours waterfall analysis, and it provided me with what their pro rata amounts would be if I had a specific valuation and a specific raise amount. And so I kind of based it off of that, asked them if they were willing to put that in, and most of them went pro rata or pro rata plus, which I didn't know was a thing until that round. I'm sure Stephen knew it was a thing.
Awesome, thank you.
It's very useful.
Yeah, your current investors are usually your best source of future capital. If you've managed those relationships well, like it's clear Haley had. And so yeah, like using that, I've used that pro rata bargaining chip too as this way to say, hey, look, if everybody did their pro rata, here's what it looked like. And you put a number in front of somebody, and they're like, okay, yeah, I could do that. Versus if you just go to them blindly and say, hey, we're raising a new round, are you in? They may just like, this is not as turnkey for them. You know what I mean? So you try to make it as easy for them as possible to say yes. And yeah, that's a really good pro tip. Probably got enough time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
This is super helpful, Stephen. Thank you. I just, again, sorry if you've said this before, but if we don't, so I'm assuming you're using actuals, right? Like when you're raising, you're plugging in some set of actuals, and then you're kind of manipulating.
Forecastr does it all for you.
Okay, so if we don't have actuals, right? If we don't, I mean, obviously we have actuals in terms, like if we're pre-revenue, right? In terms of our actuals. Do you recommend still modeling out some of these really detailed customer acquisition do you recommend putting assumptions in there and like working through this? And then I guess that's one question. And then when you're putting out these models of like, hey, we'd want to grow to here, you were talking about putting in a use of funds, kind of building that. So those are like fake worlds, right? So you're assuming that you would get the capital to kind of make that. That's kind of how you're modeling that out. Does those questions make sense? Or like, I guess, what do you do if you don't have actuals pre-revenue? And Do you recommend playing around with them and sort of making assumptions and winging it and sort of like talking through those strategic assumptions? And then can you talk a bit more about how use of funds, because that's not really like a P&L, that's like a, you know, we would get this and it would show up somewhere else kind of thing, how that works with the model.
Yeah, I think these are great questions. I think I understand them. Haley, you wanna say your
Yeah,
piece on it?
I'll take the first part because I was super pre-revenue for so long. You still have actuals as far as like what you're spending on the company right now, some sort of expenses. So it is important, I think, to model those out to understand what you're spending to show, because again, it goes back to how do you spend money and how do you think about spending money? And so for me, it was always helpful to look at every stage of our actuals, past expenses, and be like, okay, well, this is what it costs and what we're spending now. If I had like 3 more people, probably triple that, or there's like some little gatekeeps. And I always started on my expense lines first. Going back to revenue, I think it's important to model because you have to think about how you are going to acquire your future customers when you get to revenue. So, Forecastr, I can brag on Forecastr all day long and they don't pay me to do this, but I'm like one of the earlier adopters. So, and it saved my life because I hated Excel. So they have some really useful tools in the customer acquisition columns where you can like add, okay, I'm going to add a funnel. Well, what kind of funnel are you going to have? Are you going to find people online? And that it will model that out all for you. So yeah, I'm going to do paid ads on web, and here are some questions, and you kind of plug in those numbers. And then it helps you because you're thinking through the formulas there, like it's on Rails, right? And you can start to see, okay, well, if I really did pay for some ads, would I really get 10 leads? Like, is this real? And you can test that theory. And then you can kind of see how that would grow. And then from a use of funds perspective, it's all about what's your next step. So, okay, I have my expenses here today. I have how I think I would grow the business if I was going to get some customers, and here's how I would do that through those channels. And here's what the revenues or pre-revenue idea would look like. How am I going to get there? I'm going to need to make a prototype, or I'm going to need to set up my, website. So those startup costs, I've called and I've contacted some different vendors, and it's going to cost XYZ. And that goes into your forecasted imaginary funds of if I can get them, then I would get here. And then you have a model that shows, here's where I am today. If I had this money, here's where I could go. And here's how that journey would look. Here's what that journey would look like month by month. If I get the money today in March, I could probably have the website done by June. And that's what a website would do this for me on my customer acquisition.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
think
so much.
that's extremely well said. And I think it all goes back to this idea of kind of you're telling a story, it's a numerical narrative, you're simulating that business. So you want to try to give an investor a preview and okay, well, if I'm pre-revenue now, I want to be post-revenue, and here are like I think like the difference would be, for me, like I have like 12 customer acquisition funnels in there. You don't necessarily need to do that when you're pre-revenue. I think like hit on like the 3 big ones that you think are going to be important, right? Like simple, but communicative. You want to communicate the strategies that you're going to be executing on to generate that revenue. So it creates that basis for discussion. And then the same with use of funds. You're taking them on that journey. You're telling the story of how you become this big, awesome company in an attempt to convince them to invest in that narrative. So yeah, well done,
Awesome.
Haley.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Great question.
I spend a lot of time in that segment.
Well, we're right at time. This has been great. I really appreciate your all's time, and I hope Haley and I were able to add some value here. Thank you, Jenna, for setting this all up, and definitely don't miss the next one. So in a month from now, we're going to do a whole session on like actually raising a round, like how to execute a round, how to raise a round, like topics like kind of blitzing investors and driving scarcity and momentum and that kind of stuff. I think it'll be really useful. So yeah, see you guys really soon.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
all.
Stephen and Haley. That was incredible. We'll have the recording up on our blog, and I'll send a follow-up email to you all soon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.